Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly through the stone corridors of a medieval castle. The air thick with candle smoke and the distant hum of servants whispering about their lords. The hour is late, the moonlight silvering the tapestries, and you find yourself standing before a heavy oak door that guards the secrets of the noble bedchamber. What happened behind those doors wasn't always the stuff of romance. It was duty, dynasty, and sometimes awkward negotiation. You're about to discover that love and lust in medieval times weren't quite what the songs promised. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The chamber you enter is cold, even with a fire crackling faintly in the hearth. The walls are thick stone, lined with tapestries that show battles, saints, or sometimes awkwardly chaste depictions of love. You imagine yourself as a lord or lady of the 12th century, married not for affection, but for land, alliance, and lineage. Your spouse might be someone you've met once before the wedding, and now, suddenly, the whole of your bloodline depends on your ability to produce heirs. It's less happily ever after and more please let this work before dawn. Medieval marriage among nobles was a legal and spiritual contract. The church blessed it, families negotiated it, and everyone else quietly waited for the bedding ceremony to prove it was complete. Yes, that's right, the bedding ceremony. After the wedding feast, the couple was escorted to their bed by laughing guests, who sometimes threw flowers, sometimes advice, and occasionally stayed long enough to witness the first awkward moments of the new union. Privacy wasn't exactly a medieval luxury. It was more like a rumor. The expectation was clear. The act must be done, and ideally, children should follow. The church viewed intimacy within marriage as both a duty and a potential sin. It was holy if for procreation, but suspect if for pleasure. A monk writing in the 13th century warned husbands not to love their wives immoderately. The logic was twisted: too little passion, and you failed your lineage; too much, and you risked your soul. Historians still argue whether this moral tightrope actually reflected how people behaved, or if it was just the clergy's way of keeping everyone a little nervous. You picture yourself lying in that vast four-poster bed, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and smoke, your partner beside you, a stranger bound by vows and family politics. Conversation might be minimal. Education, especially about the body, was limited, and medical theories of the time were creative, to say the least. According to the medieval humoral system, passion was caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids. Men were considered hot and dry, women cold and moist, a combination thought to create natural attraction. It also led to centuries of questionable medical advice, like the idea that too much intimacy could drain a man's vital heat, or that women needed regular activity to maintain their humors. The irony, of course, is that people were probably just as curious then as now, but instead of modern magazines, they had sermons, folk songs, and gossip. A troubadour's ballad might hint at secret liaisons in flowery language, the nightingale's call being code for something far less innocent. And yet, beneath the strict moral codes, there was always a quiet undercurrent of desire, as natural and persistent as the wind whistling through the castle's arrow slits. You move closer to the fire and imagine the lives of noble women whose bodies were considered extensions of family property. Their marriages were arranged by fathers and uncles, their value tied to dowries and virginity. The wedding night wasn't a choice, it was an expectation. A noblewoman might be 14 or 15, her husband twice her age or more. It sounds horrifying now, and it often was, yet to them, this was life unquestioned, ritualized, and rarely discussed in public. Still, letters survive from a few medieval wives who found ways to express affection, humor, even defiance. In one, a 15th century woman teases her husband for missing her sweet company. It's a small glimpse of humanity breaking through the solemn facade. You might wonder, did love ever play a role in these unions? Occasionally, yes. There were couples who grew fond of each other, who shared jokes or loyalty beyond duty. A few even wrote about mutual respect. Like the 12th century couple, Heloise and Abelard, though their story ended more tragically than tenderly. Still, affection wasn't forbidden. It just wasn't the point. Producing heirs was. Everything else was secondary. The average noble might go through these motions out of obligation. But behind the scenes, passion often found other roots. Affairs among the upper class weren't unheard of, though dangerous if discovered. A queen's flirtation could trigger political chaos. A lady's misstep might end in a convent or worse. In contrast, a nobleman's indiscretions were usually tolerated as long as they didn't jeopardize alliances. The hypocrisy was as thick as the velvet drapes. Servants saw everything. They fetched the wine, stoked the fires, changed the sheets. They knew when a lord's mistress slipped down the hall, when a marriage was strained, when heirs were conceived or not. Some became confidants, others blackmailers. In that sense, medieval castles were less like fairy tale palaces and more like small villages, buzzing with secrets and surveillance. Let's pause here for one of those odd medieval facts that historians love. In the 14th century, one French medical text advised noble couples to avoid intimacy during thunderstorms, eclipses, or when frogs are abundant, as these moments were thought to create malformed offspring. The same text suggested that a husband could improve his fertility by eating roasted sparrow hearts. Romantic, isn't it? There's even record of a nobleman who insisted on sleeping with his wife only after consulting the phases of the moon. You can almost hear the collective eye roll of history. But for every superstition, there was a practical reality. The noble bedchamber doubled as a political stage. Producing heirs wasn't private business, it was national security. Kings needed sons, nobles needed continuity. When Henry VIII later split from the Catholic Church over his desperate hunt for a male heir, he was simply magnifying what every noble house already believed. No lineage, no legacy, and so intimacy was never just about connection. It was about continuity. Still, the human side persisted. Some couples probably shared laughter under the covers, joked about priests' lectures, or whispered small rebellions into the dark. The medieval world may seem alien, but emotions weren't. People still blushed, hoped, longed, and sometimes dreaded what came next. That quiet mix of duty and vulnerability was the heartbeat of medieval marriage, soft, uncertain, and deeply human. As you move further into the castle, you can almost feel the contrast between public ceremony and private unease. During the day, the noble couple performed their roles, presiding at meals, granting petitions, attending mass. But at night, those titles lord and lady meant little. In the solitude of the bedchamber, stripped of jewels and armor, they were simply two people trying to navigate the expectations of their age. Some nights, perhaps, they reached for each other with genuine warmth. Other nights, they stared at the ceiling, thinking about alliances, dowries, or the faint creak of the door hinge that never quite closed. And if you're wondering how much actual passion survived in such an environment, well, it depended. Some historians believe that despite the rigid morals, people in the medieval upper classes were far from cold. letters, poems, and even legal records show that attraction found its ways through coded gestures, a dropped glove, a shared look at a banquet, a secret token teeny sparks beneath layers of duty. Others argue that emotional connection was secondary to religious and social order. The truth probably lies somewhere between. People obeyed the rules when they had to, and found ways around them when they could. One fringe tidbit that's both hilarious and revealing: a 15th century German manuscript described a courtly guide to pleasure that actually advised noble couples to avoid kissing too much because it might cause the head to overheat and the brain to soften. Whether that was a genuine belief or a monk's attempt to ruin the mood, no one can say, but it shows how the era balanced curiosity and fear in equal measure. You settle now beside that old stone fireplace, imagining the weight of centuries pressing through the walls. Somewhere in the dark, a nobleman sighs, his mind more on taxes than tenderness. His wife lies still, staring up at carved beams, her thoughts on a child she must soon bear, or the risk she faces if she cannot. The flicker of firelight turns everything golden for a moment, their hair, their skin, the silken sheets, and then fades. The castle grows silent again, save for the wind outside. For all its rigidity, medieval intimacy wasn't devoid of beauty. There were gestures of carings exchanged, prayers whispered for safe childbirth, moments of gentleness amid constraint. The human need for connection always found a path. Even when bound by the strictest doctrines, people dreamed. Some of those dreams ended in ballads, others in heartbreak, but each one, in its quiet way, shaped how later generations would imagine love. As you lean back and let that image settle, remember that every grand castle romance probably had more awkward silences than swooning sonnets. Real life, even in silk sheets, was complicated. The world of medieval passion was bound by faith, fear, and feudalism, but it still pulsed with human warmth. Beneath the stone, the etiquette, and the endless prayers for heirs, there was always that small, persistent heartbeat that no law or priest could silence. And if you could stand there, invisible, watching centuries unfold behind those oak doors, you'd see the same pattern over and over. Two people, uncertain, curious, sometimes shy, sometimes bold, trying to bridge the gap between expectation and emotion. Maybe that's the truest thing about the past. It's not so different from the present. You step out of the castle and into a world that smells of earth, smoke, and livestock. The peasant village. The night air feels different here, closer, heavier with the scent of animals and freshly cut hay. The grand halls of stone have given way to cottages of wood and mud, each one glowing faintly from a single tallow candle behind a warped window. You hear laughter, a dog barking, the clang of a bucket somewhere down the lane. Here, in these crowded little homes, intimacy isn't whispered behind velvet curtains. It happens in plain sight, pressed up against the reality of daily survival. You duck your head to step through a cottage door and find yourself in one room that serves every purpose imaginable. There's the hearth for cooking, a table for eating, a corner for spinning wool, and, dominating one wall, the bed rough-hewn, covered in straw, perhaps shared by the entire family. If you're lucky, there's a curtain for privacy. If not, well, good luck finding a quiet moment. A peasant's life was about necessity, not romance. When you're working sunrise to sunset just to feed your children, candlelight seduction isn't exactly on the schedule. Still, that doesn't mean affection didn't exist. You can almost feel it in the small gestures: a shared smile over a bowl of pottage, a stolen kiss behind the barn, hands brushing while patching a roof. The medieval lower classes didn't have troubadours to serenade them, or poets to immortalize their love, but they had warmth, humor, and the resilience that made even the simplest connection meaningful. In many ways, their intimacy was more human than the nobles, less about ceremony, more about survival and comfort. A mainstream historical fact that might surprise you: most medieval marriages, even among peasants, required the church's blessing. By the 13th century, the church had taken full control of marriage laws, declaring that consent spoken freely by both partners was what made a marriage valid. In theory, that meant a man and woman could marry simply by exchanging vows before witnesses, even without a priest. In practice, though, peasants rarely had the luxury of formality. Their weddings were community events, full of drinking, dancing, and, inevitably, gossip. The church would catch up later. Filing the paperwork after the feast was over, you settle beside the hearth, feeling the warmth seep into your boots. Across the room, a couple finishes their meal: thick bread, onions, maybe a bit of salted pork, if the harvest was kind. When the fire burns low, they pull the children to one side of the bed, or sometimes to a pile of straw on the floor, and lie down together. There's no privacy, no luxury, and yet, somehow, a quiet tenderness lingers. You hear the faint murmur of voices, a child turning in sleep, the occasional snore from the corner. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Medieval peasants faced constant hardship. The rhythm of their lives was dictated by the seasons, by harvests, by the whims of landlords and weather. Intimacy, when it happened, wasn't for poetry, was for warmth, for reassurance, for that small spark of humanity amid the dirt and drudgery. Love was practical. Attraction often followed proximity. You worked, ate, and slept beside the same people every day. Affection grew from familiarity, not fantasy. And yet, even among the poor, there were rules. The church forbade intimacy outside marriage, branding it as sin. Adultery, fornication, even too much pleasure within marriage could lead to confession, penance, or public humiliation. But here's the catch: those same priests often lived close enough to know everyone's secrets. In small villages, morality and hypocrisy were constant companions. A whispered tryst might earn gossip, but rarely excommunication. After all, when everyone's survival depended on everyone else, judgment had limits. You probably imagine the medieval bed as something romantic: a carved frame, soft blankets, candlelight flickering against plaster walls. In truth, for most people, it was a straw mattress crawling with fleas. The term "hitting the hay" wasn't poetic, it was literal. Peasants filled sacks with hay or reeds, and once the bed started smelling too earthy, they burned the old straw and replaced it. Sheets were a luxury, so were baths. When people did bathe, it was usually in rivers or shared tubs, sometimes with neighbors. There's a famous medieval saying, "A clean body is the sign of a lazy soul." So yes, you could say passion required strong stomachs back then. One quirky tidbit worth savoring: historians found court records from the 14th century, describing a peasant couple who divorced because the husband could not bear the smell of his wife. The wife defended herself by saying he was no rose himself. The judge ordered them to reconcile after a month apart, suggesting perhaps both bathe before trying again. Whether they did, history doesn't say, but it's proof that love and laughter survived even the least glamorous corners of medieval life. And if you're wondering, yes, peasants had their own romantic traditions. May Day festivals, harvest dances, and midsummer celebrations often served as excuses for courtship, or, at least, for flirting under the guise of merrymaking. In some villages, unmarried men and women would pair off for a year-long trial marriage. after which they could choose to wed officially or part ways. The church disapproved, but the community often looked the other way. Survival made pragmatists of everyone. The line between affection and arrangement was blurry. Dowries weren't just for nobles, peasants, too, treated marriage as an economic pact. A man might marry a woman with a good cow, a patch of land, or a decent family name. A woman might choose a man who could plow straight, keep a roof dry, and not drink away the grain. And yet, beneath those calculations, emotion still found its way. There are surviving folk songs from England and France, where lovers speak tenderly, teasingly, about shared hardships and small joys like keeping warm together during winter nights, or saving the last bit of bread for the other. Those songs, often sung in taverns, were as close as the lower classes got to poetry. You imagine yourself now lying on that straw bed, the fire fading to embers. The walls creak in the night wind, and rain taps softly on the roof. You can hear cows shifting in the byre next door, chickens rustling. Your partner's hand brushes yours, calloused, warm, familiar. It's not a grand gesture, but it means everything. In this world, affection is survival, tenderness is rebellion. Historians still argue whether peasants' attitudes toward pleasure were shaped more by the church or by practicality. Some believe moral guilt weighed heavily, that villagers internalized the fear of sin. Others point to bawdy folk tales and carnival traditions as evidence that people simply laughed off the church's stern warnings. There's truth in both. Medieval Europe was a patchwork of contradictions, where priests thundered about chastity on Sunday, and the same villagers danced provocatively around maypoles by Tuesday. A fringe belief from the time even claimed that intimacy during Lent could bring bad luck to crops. So, for 40 days each spring, couples abstained, not out of piety alone, but out of genuine fear that their wheat might fail. It sounds superstitious now, but to a farmer's mind, the connection between fertility of the land and fertility of the body felt tangible. Life was a cycle of sowing, reaping, and hoping. You can almost see the symbolism, human desire, intertwined with the earth itself. As you look around the smoky cottage, you notice something else: the absence of privacy. The idea of a private life simply didn't exist. Whole families slept in the same space. Children grew up watching their parents' lives unfold without walls or secrets. It wasn't scandalous. It was normal. Only centuries later would society invent the luxury of privacy and the concept of intimacy as something hidden. In the medieval village, the body was part of daily life, not a thing of shame. Still, judgment existed. Unmarried women who became pregnant faced harsh consequences. Some were forced to perform public penance, kneeling barefoot in church, confessing before the community. Others were quietly sent away to relatives. Men, predictably, were often forgiven with a wink and a muttered, "Boys will be boys." The double standard ran deep, from castle to cottage, yet the same communities that punished could also protect. Neighbors might help raise a child, mend a scandal, or simply pretend not to notice who shared whose bed after a feast. Life was too short for moral outrage every day. You can almost hear the laughter and teasing at those feasts, the off-key songs, the spilled ale, the occasional scandalous dance. The medieval world wasn't constantly solemn. Villagers knew how to enjoy themselves. They made jokes that would scandalize a monk, told stories full of earthy humor, and saw nothing strange about finding joy in hardship. Even the church sometimes looked the other way. Priests, after all, depended on these same people for food, shelter, and community. One of the most charming details from village records comes from 15th century England, where a parish priest wrote a note complaining that his congregation kept getting married too joyfully. Apparently, peasants insisted on holding their weddings outdoors, with singing, drinking, and scandalously dancing. The priest preferred solemn vows in the church, but the people wanted laughter. You can sense the tug-of-war between doctrine and delight, between the pulpit and the dance floor, and honestly, you can probably guess who usually won. As the night deepens, the cottage quiets. You sit beside the hearth, watching smoke curl upward into the rafters. You think of how love must have felt in such a place, not as a luxury, but as a moment of lightness in a heavy world. A hand held after a long day in the fields, a whispered promise beneath a leaking roof, a shared loaf when hunger was near. Maybe that's the truest kind of love, born not from ballads, but from survival. You step outside again, feeling the chill of night wrap around you. The stars are faint, but steady. The village sleeps, roofs huddled together like a cluster of tired hearts. Somewhere, a couple stirs under their blanket of straw. Tomorrow they'll rise before dawn, feed the animals, and work until their muscles ache, but for now, there's warmth between them, brief and precious. It's tempting to romanticize it all, to imagine simplicity as purity, but medieval peasant life was rarely simple. It was a constant negotiation between faith and flesh, between necessity and desire. People sinned, repented, and sinned again. They laughed, they suffered, and they kept going. And in that endless rhythm, love, messy, human, resilient, found a way to survive. So as you walk the muddy path back toward the castle lights, you realize that intimacy wasn't just the privilege of the noble, it was everywhere, shared by the poor in their straw beds, whispered across market stalls, sung under the stars after harvest. The difference wasn't in passion, it was in comfort. The nobles had silk and politics, the peasants had warmth and weariness, but both, in their own ways, sought the same fleeting miracle, connection. The bells of the village church begin to toll before dawn, cutting through the mist that rolls in from the fields. You follow the sound up the hill, toward the stone tower that dominates the landscape. Inside, candles flicker in alcoves, casting trembling halos of light over worn pews. The smell of wax and incense clings to the air, mingling with damp earth and the faint, sour odor of old robes. You're stepping now into the part of medieval life where passion meets fear, the realm of the church, where every heartbeat and thought of desire was catalogued as sin, temptation, or penance waiting to happen. The church, in the 12th to 18th centuries, held an extraordinary kind of power over people's bodies and minds. It didn't just rule their faith, it ruled their bedrooms. What you did, when you did it, and even how you did it, were subjects of moral scrutiny. The clergy wrote long lists of forbidden acts, dividing the human body into zones of holiness and danger. For most medieval Christians, the rules were clear enough. Intimacy was allowed only within marriage, and only for the purpose of having children. Anything beyond that, even holding hands too long with the wrong kind of warmth, could lead to confession and punishment. You sit quietly on a wooden pew, the sound of chanting echoing down the nave. Behind that serene melody lies centuries of anxiety. To the medieval mind, passion was a fire that could burn down a soul. Priests preached that the flesh was weak, that pleasure itself was the devil's trick. Yet, paradoxically, the same church needed people to keep having children to fill pews, fields, and armies. So it walked a tightrope, urging restraint while depending on reproduction. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the church developed a detailed calendar for when intimacy was forbidden: Lent, Advent, feast days, Fridays, Sundays, and even during menstruation or pregnancy, all off limits. If you did the math, Nearly half the year was considered inappropriate for conjugal relations. Of course, peasants and nobles alike often ignored the rule, but the fear of sin lingered. You can imagine the awkward tension between couples, both devout and human, whispering to each other before deciding whether tonight was holy enough. The confession booth was the great safety valve for all that guilt. You can almost hear the creak of the wooden door as you step inside, the dim light filtering through a small lattice. On the other side, a priest waits, faceless, cloaked in authority. People came to confess everything: real sins, imagined ones, and sometimes questions they were too afraid to ask in daylight. A young wife might whisper about her curiosity or her doubts. A husband might admit to dreams he couldn't control. Confessors kept thick manuals to guide their questioning, listing sins of the flesh with almost obsessive detail. Ironically, those manuals became some of the most explicit literature of the medieval world. You can picture the tension. People walking home afterward, faces flushed, unsure whether they'd been cleansed or simply exposed, yet the ritual offered relief. Confession allowed the church to control not just morality, but emotion itself. Desire was acknowledged, punished, and reabsorbed into the system, like steam venting from a boiler that could never stop burning. Historians still argue whether ordinary people truly believed every warning, or whether they treated confession like a social formality, something you did to keep the priest happy. Some evidence suggests that while sermons thundered about purity, daily life carried on much as before. The church's rules might have been strict, but enforcement depended on the priest's temperament and the gossip of neighbors. In smaller communities, everyone knew who visited the confessional too often, and that alone could spark rumors. Still, for those who took faith seriously, guilt could be crushing. Some saints wrote of battles against temptation so fierce they prayed to be made ugly, blind, or even ill to resist desire. The language of sin turned natural emotion into warfare. You might imagine a medieval monk pacing in his cell, terrified by his own thoughts. One 14th century friar wrote that even dreaming of intimacy could invite demonic attack. You can almost hear him muttering prayers in the dark, trying to silence something he couldn't name. The church's teachings shaped every layer of society. It wasn't just priests scolding peasants, nobles, too, feared spiritual consequences. Manuals for confessors included special sections for aristocrats, warning against excessive pleasure, vanity, or lust. The same men who ordered armies into battle would kneel before chaplains, terrified that their bedroom habits might cost them eternal salvation. The contradiction was staggering. Men who shed blood without hesitation trembled at the thought of kissing in the wrong mood. And yet, the clergy themselves were far from immune to temptation. You might step quietly through a monastery and feel that strange tension humming behind the chanting. Monks and priests were supposed to live in celibacy, dedicating their lives entirely to God. But records from across Europe tell another story. There were secret relationships, hidden children, even entire communities that quietly tolerated their priests' housekeepers. In one English diocese, a 15th century bishop admitted that almost half his clergy kept women in their homes for domestic help. The official punishment was suspension or penance, but more often it was simply ignored. As long as scandal stayed quiet, the people saw through the hypocrisy. Folk tales of the time often mocked lustful priests or lascivious monks, turning them into comic villains. You can imagine villagers snickering behind their hands as they listened to stories about clergymen caught climbing through windows or being discovered by angry husbands. Humor became a kind of rebellion, a way to laugh at the impossible standards imposed on ordinary life. But the fear never truly disappeared. Church art reinforced it: carvings of sinners writhing in flames, frescoes showing demons clutching lovers. Even cathedrals, those soaring marvels of faith, hid warnings in their stonework. Look closely at the margins of a medieval church sculpture, and you might find grotesques showing humans locked in eternal punishment for the sins of the flesh. It was both a sermon and a scare tactic. Beauty above, terror below. And yet, despite the grim theology, the church also offered comfort. Weddings were blessed, pregnancies celebrated, children baptized. Priests counseled couples on faith, fidelity, and forgiveness. The medieval church wasn't only repressive, it also gave structure and meaning to people's lives. For those who believed, it provided a moral compass, even if that compass sometimes spun in circles. You stand now in the cool stillness of the church, listening to the echo of your own breathing. The priest's sermon earlier had spoken about temptation as a dragon to be slain, the body as a battlefield, but outside, life goes on: markets, feasts, laughter, flirtation. The human heart doesn't follow calendars or commandments easily. You imagine a young couple slipping hands together after Mass, exchanging shy smiles under the eyes of painted saints. For all its control, the church could never truly extinguish that spark. There's an almost tragic beauty in that contradiction. The same faith that condemned desire also sanctified marriage, turning it into a holy act when performed correctly. That tension between body and soul defined medieval thought. Some theologians argued that pleasure within marriage wasn't sinful if it strengthened love. Others warned that even a moment of enjoyment could taint the soul. The debates grew so intricate that one 13th century scholar famously declared, "Better to do it without joy than to sin with laughter." You can almost hear the collective sigh of centuries of married couples trying to follow that advice. A quirky historical tidbit: one confessor's manual advised priests to ask married women whether they felt delight in the act. If they answered yes, the priest was to assign extra prayers. The idea that happiness could itself be suspicious says everything about the era's discomfort with the body. And yet, those same manuals show another side: priests were instructed to advise moderation, not total abstinence. The church didn't want extinction, it wanted control. By the 16th century, reform movements began to fracture that control. Protestant leaders like Martin Luther challenged the idea that celibacy was holier than marriage. Luther himself married a former nun, declaring that love between man and woman was a divine gift, not a curse. The pendulum began to swing slowly back toward acceptance. Still, even in the 17th and 18th centuries, old habits lingered. Confessionals stayed busy, and sermons still warned against the dangers of fleshly indulgence. As you walk out of the church, morning light spills through stained glass, coloring the floor in reds and blues. The villagers cross themselves and head back to their work, their sins temporarily absolved, their lives unchanged. You realize that for centuries, people lived in this cycle: sin, guilt, confession, relief, repeat. The church had created an emotional rhythm as predictable as the seasons. And in that rhythm, desire persisted. It slipped through the cracks of doctrine, hid behind whispered prayers, and found expression in the most unexpected places: in art, in laughter, in the human need to touch and be touched. The church tried to define love through theology, but people kept defining it through experience. As night begins to fall again, you imagine the same priest who preached against passion, sitting alone in his quarters, staring into the candle flame. He's human, too, his vows heavy, his thoughts wandering. Maybe he remembers a face from years ago, or a song from a village festival, or the scent of flowers that shouldn't mean anything, but still does. The struggle wasn't just in the pews, it lived inside every soul that ever tried to balance faith with feeling. You leave the church behind and walk into the cool, evening air. The bells toll again, not as command, but as comfort. The sound fades across the fields, and for a moment, the world feels still. You think about all those centuries of whispered prayers, of people kneeling in fear and hope, asking for forgiveness for being what they were. Maybe that's the quiet truth the church never fully admitted. That the longing it tried to restrain was also the heartbeat of creation itself. You wander through a bustling medieval marketplace. The air thick with the scents of honey, herbs, and something far muskier beneath it all. Around you, merchants cry out about charms and tonics that promise love, passion, or protection from the very same. You pass a woman with a basket of dried herbs. She catches your wrist and whispers, a pinch of basil for faithfulness, or a touch of mandrake if you'd rather not be. You smile awkwardly and keep walking, but her grin lingers like a secret. You realize that in this age, love and desire were not only felt, they were brewed, bottled, and whispered into being. The medieval mind didn't see passion as purely natural. It was something magical, dangerous, and worth paying for if it worked. Somewhere near the edge of the market, you see men huddled around a stall where a peddler hawks a potion in tiny glass vials. He swears it makes one's heart race or something else rise with unholy power, distilled from the blood of a black rooster, he boasts, waving the vial dramatically. You almost laugh, but the crowd is deadly serious. They're desperate, curious, or both, because in a time when religion dictated when and how people could touch one another, alchemy became rebellion. People didn't just pray for love, they tried to make it in a cauldron. In the dim corners of cottages and castles alike, lovers turned to charms as old as folklore itself. A dried frog sewn into a pouch, a lock of hair tied with red thread, or a sprinkle of powdered unicorn horn, though that last one was almost always fake. The line between medicine and magic blurred. Real apothecaries sold concoctions meant to balance the humors, while traveling wise, women offered powders to wake the sleeping heart. Some of it was harmless placebo, but other mixtures were deadly. Mandrake root, one of the most famous so-called aphrodisiacs, could kill if too strong. Yet even that danger added allure. Desire, in the medieval sense, was not supposed to be safe. Fit was supposed to feel forbidden, of course. The church tried to keep a firm hand over this chaotic realm of lust and love. You could be fined, even excommunicated, for using love charms or potions, because it implied meddling with God's will. But the harder priests preached against it. The more people whispered about it after Mass. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely believed, or simply convenient excuses for passion. Was the potion a shield of superstition? A way to say, it wasn't my fault, I was bewitched? Or did some truly feel the magic ripple through them? No one can say for sure. As night falls, you find yourself by candlelight in a small cottage. A young woman grinds herbs with a mortar and pestle, humming softly. Her lover sits by the fire, watching nervously as she pours the powder into a cup of warmed wine. For courage, she says, handing it to him. The liquid smells sharp pepper and rosemary, maybe something else. He drinks, coughs, then kisses her with sudden heat. You can't tell if it's the herbs or the anticipation that works faster. Either way, she smiles like she's just cast a spell. Then there were the darker corners of medieval superstition where desire crossed into fear. A spurned lover might seek revenge, not with swords, but with curses. A wax figure stuck with pins, a charm buried beneath a doorstep. Men accused women of witchcraft, simply because they had turned them down, or because their marriages had gone cold. She bewitched me, they'd say, and suddenly the woman who once sold herbs for love found herself tied to a stake. It was a tragic irony. The same ingredients that promised romance could just as easily become evidence of sin in wealthier circles. Alchemy replaced cottage magic. Scholars and nobles studied supposed philosophers, potions that promised vitality and prolonged youth. Some even hinted at eternal desire. You picture an aging duke sipping a golden elixir, hoping it will restore the fire of his youth. Spoiler, it mostly just restored his stomach cramps. Still, the dream persisted. Even the educated longed for control over something as unpredictable as lust. But not all magic was meant to inflame. Some spells were crafted to cool passion, to keep wandering husbands faithful, or to suppress inconvenient desire in widows or priests. A popular charm advised women to place dried nettle beneath their lover's pillow to make him burn only for her. Another said to carry a carved bone in one's shoe to suppress temptation altogether. The medieval world was full of contradictions. Love was sacred, but lust was a sin. Passion was human, yet also dangerous, so they tried to bind it with magic the same way they bound it with prayer. You wander next into a manor garden at twilight. Two figures linger by the fountain, a lady and a knight, her hand brushing his sleeve. They whisper of charms and tokens, of a ribbon she tied around his wrist before battle for protection. He says it saved his life. She laughs softly, but you see the truth. Whether or not the charm held real power, the belief in it bound them closer than any priest's blessing. In a world where war and plague loomed, love itself felt fragile, so people clung to any ritual that might make it last. Even perfume carried superstition. Scents of musk, amber, and rosewater were believed to stir affection. Wealthy lovers exchanged scented gloves or handkerchiefs, while peasants might crush flowers into oil to anoint their skin before meeting a sweetheart. It wasn't just about smelling nice, it was about summoning attraction through the senses. The medieval person's world was sensual, tactile, aromatic. Every smell, every taste had meaning. Some of the most fascinating stories come from medical texts written by monks. Oddly enough, they described remedies for cold loins, tired humors, and languid spirits. The recommended cures ranged from baths infused with thyme to the consumption of pigeon hearts. None of it sounds very romantic now, but for them, these were genuine attempts to restore balance between body and soul. Because medieval medicine believed the heart wasn't just symbolic, it was literally the seat of desire. A warm heart meant vitality, a cold one meant apathy. The next time someone said they were lovesick, they weren't exaggerating, they meant it. You pause at a crossroads where two travelers argue over whether love can be forced. One insists that certain herbs guarantee affection. The other laughs, claiming love is divine, not brewed. Their debate sounds timeless, an echo of the same argument we still have today between science and emotion. Historians still argue whether these old rituals were truly magic or just early forms of psychology. After all, believing something would work often made it feel like it did. The human mind is the strongest potion of all. Every culture had its own spin on the idea. In Italy, a mix of crushed pearls and honey was said to make one irresistible. In France, women carried apple seeds steeped in wine as a charm for passion. In England, men wore wolf teeth to appear more virile. Some of these sound absurd now, but you can imagine the hope behind them. In a world where disease, death, and social rules constrained intimacy, these tokens gave people a sense of agency, a way to play with fate. Yet, there's something endearing about it all, isn't there? The idea that love, that most uncontrollable of feelings, could be coaxed with a few herbs or whispered words. You can picture couples clutching charms like secret promises, or sneaking to the market for a harmless tonic. It's almost romantic, the intersection of belief and desire, where imagination filled in what reality denied. One story tells of a merchant's wife who fell in love with a troubadour. Desperate to make him love her back, she paid a wise woman for a potion. The potion worked, or seemed to. The troubadour declared his love, but soon became obsessive, jealous, even cruel. The woman fled, the wise woman was arrested, and the potion's recipe vanished. Whether true or not, it captured the erosphere, that meddling with love was like calling fire into your hands. You might get warmth, or you might get burned as you stroll past another stall. A young man offers you a pouch tied with crimson string. For luck in love, he says. You almost laugh, but then hesitate. The pouch feels warm in your hand. Is it the sun, or something else? Maybe belief itself is the oldest magic, believing you can be loved, that your feelings can matter in a world ruled by hierarchy and sin. That's what these potions really sold. Not love, not lust, but hope. You look around once more, the fading sunlight glinting off bottles and charms. Lovers exchanging coins for whispers of chance. Somewhere, a church bell tolls in warning. The merchants start packing up their wares, and the square empties slowly. You realize that for centuries, people have reached for something beyond themselves to understand desire, whether through prayer, potion, or poetry. It's all the same longing, the need to feel wanted, to make the invisible visible. So you walk away, the faint smell of herbs clinging to your sleeve, and wonder whether anything's really changed. Maybe we've just swapped mandrake for modern perfumes, charms for apps, and whispered spells for playlists. But the heart, it's as foolish and hopeful as ever. And somewhere, beneath all the superstition, there's something deeply human in that. And yet, for all its control, the system never truly killed desire. It only made it secret, layered, and symbolic. The tighter society's grip, the more inventive people became in expressing love. A glance at a feast, a lock of hair in a locket, a coded message in embroidery. All small rebellions against the impossible standards of purity. You pause by a candle and watch its flame flicker. The irony of it all hums softly. The world that worshipped chastity also depended on passion to survive. Without it, there would be no airs, no songs, no stories, and so the virgin ideal remained both revered and ridiculed, a dream that both protected and imprisoned. You walk away from the chamber where it all began, through halls echoing with hymns and gossip alike. Somewhere, a woman prays to the Virgin Mary for forgiveness, not because she sinned, but because she dared to feel human. Somewhere else, a man brags of a conquest, never realizing his world was built on the fear of the very thing he celebrated. And as the candles burn low, you realize that in the medieval world, purity wasn't just about the body. It was a mirror for power, fear, and desire itself. It wasn't about what people did, but about what they could be punished for. And like most rules written by men, it said more about their insecurities than about anyone's virtue. You step through the arched gates of a monastery at dawn, the air thick with incense and dew. Bells toll softly, summoning monks to prayer, their voices blending into a low, rhythmic hum. It feels peaceful, almost hypnotic, but as you linger in the shadows, you realize that beneath this calm is a quiet tension. Desire doesn't disappear at the monastery door. It just hides behind vows, behind fear, behind silence. The world inside these walls is supposed to be untouched by temptation. Yet the very act of denying the body seems to make its whispers louder. You move deeper into the cloister, and it becomes clear that purity here is both armor and torment. The rules are absolute. Chastity is not just encouraged, it's sacred law. For monks and nuns to touch too long, even to imagine pleasure, is to invite sin. They are supposed to belong entirely to God. But humans are stubbornly human. Even in stone sanctuaries, a young monk might find his thoughts wandering as he tends the herb garden, his fingers brushing lavender and remembering a warmth long forbidden. A nun might dream of her life before the veil, a fleeting memory of laughter at a festival, and wake with tears she can't explain. You can almost hear those silent struggles echoing through the cold halls. Historians still argue whether the strict celibacy of the church was ever truly practiced or merely preached. Records suggest both saintly devotion and scandalous failure. In some abbeys, discipline was fierce confession for impure thoughts, fasting for wayward eyes, but in others, secrecy ruled. There are letters from abbots begging bishops to overlook small moral lapses. One monastery in the 14th century was described as a hive of gossip and affection unbecoming of holy men. A delicate way of saying love had slipped in through the chapel door. You find yourself in the scriptorium, where monks copy manuscripts by candlelight. One pauses over an illuminated margin, his pen drifting into a curve that looks suspiciously like a woman's face. Maybe it's just decoration, or maybe it's memory. Desire in these walls often had no outlet but art. You've probably seen those strange carvings on old churches, mischievous figures, lovers tangled in stone, even lewd scenes tucked beneath solemn angels. Scholars debate whether they were warnings or confessions. The sculptor's rebellion hidden in plain sight. In convents, things were no simpler. Young women entered for many reasons: faith, family pressure, or lack of dowry. Some embraced the life sincerely, others mourned the world they'd lost. The convent was both sanctuary and cage. Friendships bloomed easily to easily, according to the church. There are chronicles of nuns forming particular attachments, of sleeping in each other's cells for comfort. Some of these bonds were spiritual, others undoubtedly more tender. The church didn't have language for such affection, so it called it sin. You imagine two nuns sitting by a window, their hands brushing as they share a prayer book. One blushes, the other doesn't pull away. In the silence that follows, a storm of guilt begins. They will confess it tomorrow, promise penance, and repeat the cycle again. Even here, love finds a way to exist between the lines of scripture. But not all stories end quietly. In the archives of several monasteries are reports of fallen sisters and erring brothers. One nun in 15th century Germany was discovered pregnant. She claimed an angel had visited her. The abbess didn't believe her, of course, but the tale spread quickly, half scandal, half miracle. Another record tells of monks who built a secret passage between their monastery and the nearby convent, using it for nighttime visits until a suspicious villager exposed them. The punishment was severe: imprisonment, public confession, exile. Yet the story repeats across Europe, again and again, as though no wall could fully contain human desire. You wander into a chapel where sunlight filters through stained glass. The colors wash across the floor, deep crimson, soft gold, and for a moment, you understand why faith and desire, often tangled, both burn with longing, both demand surrender. The mystics of the Middle Ages described their connection to God in almost sensual terms. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote of being pierced by divine love until she moaned aloud in sweet agony. Monks, like Bernard of Clairvaux, composed sermons comparing Christ's love to the embrace of a bridegroom. To modern ears, it sounds romantic. To them, it was sacred ecstasy. Still, you can't help but wonder if this spiritual passion sometimes blurred into something more human. The church feared that possibility deeply. That's why every rule, every confession, every punishment existed to control the fire without extinguishing it completely, because even they knew desire couldn't be erased, only redirected. So monks channeled it into devotion, nuns turned it into prayer. Love became metaphor, and metaphor became safety. You follow a monk into the refectory, where silence reigns during meals. He reads from a holy text, while the others eat in silence. But his eyes, tired and soft, reveal something more. Maybe he's thinking about the woman he left behind when he took his vows. Maybe he's thinking about nothing at all, just trying to drown out the hum of temptation that never truly fades. Outside, in the herb garden, a nun tends to sage and rosemary, healing herbs meant to soothe the body and calm the mind. Yet even these were wrapped in superstition. Some believed certain plants could cool the humors and suppress lust. Others believed they could spark it. So medicine and morality danced uneasily together, and the apothecary's shelf became a battlefield between desire and duty. The balance was fragile. The very isolation that was meant to protect purity sometimes bred obsession. There are letters from confessors warning of unholy affections born of too much solitude. It's almost tragic. The very effort to flee the world made some monks and nuns more haunted by it. In the quiet, the mind wanders. The imagination fills the silence with faces and memories that prayer can't always erase. Still, there were those who found genuine peace. You can sense it in the rhythm of their daily life, the prayers, the chanting, the seasons turning. For them, chastity wasn't repression, it was clarity. They believed love for God made earthly desire unnecessary. These were the saints, the ascetics, the ones whose faith burned brighter than their bodies. But they were rare, and even they wrote of struggles, dreams, and temptations. Holiness, it seems, was never free of hunger. In some places, though temptation took a darker shape, power and secrecy created opportunities for exploitation. Chronicles tell of abbots who preyed on novices, of priests who used confession as coercion. The church publicly condemned such acts, but often handled them quietly, fearing scandal. You can almost feel the hypocrisy. Celibacy demanded, purity preached, yet behind the altar, corruption festering. The system created both saints and sinners, sometimes in the same person. Historians still debate whether the enforcement of celibacy helped preserve the church's spiritual integrity or simply masked human weakness. Probably both. What's clear is that these vows turned intimacy into the most forbidden fruit of all. The more forbidden it became, the more it occupied their thoughts. The same energy that once fueled romance in the world outside now poured into their devotion, art, and mysticism. You could say that celibacy made passion eternal. It never ended. It just transformed. You walk through the cloister one last time. The air smells of wax and earth. In the garden, the wind carries a faint chant from the chapel. It sounds almost like a lullaby, soft and full of longing. You realize that desire in these walls was never truly gone. It was sublimated into beauty, into prayer, into song. The same energy that drives lovers to embrace drives monks to write poetry to the divine. The language is different, but the feeling underneath is the same. A monk once wrote, "The body longs, but the soul interprets." Maybe that's what all of this was about. Struggle to translate physical hunger into something the church could bless. And maybe, deep down, they knew that denying the body didn't erase it from existence. It only made it sacred in another form. As you step outside the monastery gates, you look back at the stone walls glowing in the fading sun. you can't help but think of the countless lives lived behind them. People who tried to silence their hearts and failed beautifully. Their confessions, hidden or written in coded verses, remind you that even in the most devout corners of the medieval world, humanity always found a way to surface, that the bells ring again, low and resonant. Somewhere, a monk kneels in prayer, whispering for forgiveness, for feelings that make him more human than sinful. Somewhere, a nun clutches a rosary, not to banish temptation, but to find comfort in it. And you walk away thinking that maybe holiness and desire were never enemies, at all just two sides of the same longing to be seen, to be touched, to be loved, even by God. The storm comes in the night, rattling the shutters of a small timber cottage at the edge of a medieval village. You wake to the sound of rain hammering the roof, and through the crack in the wooden door, a cold wind slips in, carrying the smell of earth and smoke. Outside, the world is a swirl of mud and shadows, but the faint glow from the hearth keeps the room warm enough to remind you that you are not alone. Someone coughs softly in the corner, an old man, wrapped in blankets, muttering a prayer for mercy. You realize that, in this century, storms are not just weather, they are omens. For most of medieval life, nature was both provider and punisher. The people depended on it entirely and feared it completely. Every harvest, every hunt, every season was a fragile negotiation between survival and loss. When the sky darkened too early or frost lingered too long, they didn't see coincidence, they saw divine anger or witchcraft at work. You step outside after dawn, the rain easing, and watch villagers trudging through the mud to inspect the fields. Their faces are lined with worry. Every broken stalk of grain is a prayer unanswered. The village priest is already out there too, sprinkling holy water over the soil, whispering Latin words few of the villagers understand. He tells them God tests the faithful, but his eyes dart nervously toward the clouds, as if he too doubts his own certainty. You begin to see how fragile faith can be when the world turns cruel. A single bad season could destroy more than crops. It could unravel belief itself. You wander through the village and notice how every aspect of life is tied to the rhythm of nature. The bells of the church mark the hours, but the real calendar is written in frost and sunlight. Spring means hope, summer means work, autumn means fear, winter means endurance. In the fields, men bend their backs to the soil, while women patch roofs and gather herbs to ward off sickness. Every sound, the creak of the plough, the bleat of a goat, the clatter of wooden wheels, is a reminder of how close they live to the edge of hunger. But nature wasn't only feared, it was also adored, even worshipped quietly, long after the church claimed to have erased all pagan customs. You can see it in the way villagers hang garlands on doorways in May or toss grain into streams to feed the water spirits. Old habits die slowly, and beneath the surface of Christian ritual, older gods still breathe. When the priest blesses the fields, the villagers cross themselves, but when he turns away, they whisper to the earth, calling her mother, just as their ancestors did. You stop near the forest that borders the village. The trees are massive, their roots twisted deep into black soil. No one enters too far after dusk. The forest is said to belong to others, to spirits, to fae, to the lost. Still, some do venture in, charcoal burners, hunters, or those desperate enough to seek forbidden remedies. You've heard the whispers about a woman who lives there alone, an herbalist, or maybe a witch, depending on who you ask. In times of illness or childbirth, villagers sneak to her door. If they're healed, they call it a miracle. If they die, it's her curse. The church calls her dangerous. The villagers call her necessary. You walk deeper into the woods until the air grows still and damp. Her hut stands near a crooked stream, smoke curling from the chimney. When she opens the door, her eyes are bright and knowing, and her hands are stained green with herbs. She doesn't speak much, just nods toward a bundle of dried plants hanging from the rafters. Every leaf, every root has meaning, some heal, some harm. To her, nature is not divine or evil, it's alive, and it listens. She moves like someone who has long since stopped fearing the forest and started belonging to it. Back in the village, the church wages a quieter war against her kind. Sermons warn of women who consort with spirits. And yet, when a cow won't give milk or a child won't breathe, the same people who cross themselves in fear run to her door. It's the paradox of medieval life. Faith in God by day, superstition by night. Even the priest carries a charm beneath his robe, though he'd never admit it aloud. As the years pass, seasons bring both bounty and ruin. The winter of 1315, one of the great famines, arrives without mercy. You can feel it in your bones. The cold that never leaves, the hunger that gnaws like a second soul. Fields rot in endless rain, grain turns black, and livestock die where they stand. The people eat bark, moss, even the seeds they should have saved for spring. Mothers cradle children too weak to cry, and through it all, the church insists it is God's will, a punishment for sin. But the villagers begin to murmur in secret. Maybe it's not heaven's anger, maybe it's the earth herself turning away. The old herbalist in the woods becomes their last hope. They go to her quietly, desperate, clutching coins or trinkets to trade. She gives them roots to chew, ointments to warm their blood, words to whisper under the moon. When a few survive, her name spreads with awe. But when more die, fear twists awe into accusation. It doesn't take much, one rumor, one priest's sermon, one frightened mob, and suddenly her hut is burning, her name cursed. You can smell the smoke, hear the wood crack, see her figure vanish into the flames without a scream. Afterward, the priest leads a prayer for deliverance. But the villagers keep their eyes down, knowing they've killed the only one who listened to the land. Time moves on, the famine ends, but something in the people has shifted. The fear remains, lodged like a splinter in their faith. They still pray to God, but in their hearts, they know they've silenced a voice that once kept them alive. You feel that guilt in the soil itself, heavy and cold, as if the earth remembers. Centuries later, scholars will call it superstition, but to those who lived it, it was survival. When the wind howled and the sky stayed grey for weeks, they didn't have science to explain it. They had stories of spirits who guarded rivers, of saints who tamed storms, of witches who could speak to the rain. These weren't delusions, they were comfort. When you live so close to death, belief becomes a form of endurance. You sit by a dying fire as night returns, the storm's voice distant now. Somewhere beyond the fields, a wolf howls. The villagers draw their shutters tight, but even as fear grips them, they still depend on the wild. Tomorrow they'll gather mushrooms at the forest edge, fetch water from the same stream where they once made offerings. Their lives are a cycle of fear and faith, gratitude and guilt. The church teaches them to thank God for the harvest, yet deep down, they thank the earth too. You realize something profound. The medieval world was not divided between faith and nature. It was built on their uneasy marriage. People didn't choose one or the other. They prayed to both, hoping one would listen. The monastery may have written the laws, but the fields wrote the truth. Every generation learned it the same way, through hunger, through storms, through the soft miracle of spring returning after all seemed lost in the distance. You hear bells again, signaling evening prayer. The villagers gather in the small stone church, candles flickering, voices low. But when they leave, many pause at the old oak tree by the gate, pressing a hand to its bark for luck. The priest pretends not to notice. Perhaps even he does it when no one's watching, because in this world, divinity wears many faces, some carved in wood, some hidden in roots. As you walk back toward the forest, the moon rises, silver and sharp. Mist curls over the fields like breath. You feel the pulse of the land under your feet, slow and ancient. The people here may have called it God, or magic, or luck, but you can tell it's all the same thing. A need to make sense of a world that could love and destroy them in the same moment. And so the medieval mind learned to live between two truths, that nature is sacred and cruel, and that to survive, you must honor both. That's why they blessed wells, kissed crosses, and burned witches all in the same breath. Fear made them devout. Hope made them human. When the first light of dawn returns, you stand at the forest's edge once more. The fields glisten with dew, and in the far distance, the church spire catches the sun. Life begins again. The plows creak, the bells ring, and the people bend to their work, carrying with them the quiet understanding that every seed planted is a prayer, every harvest a mercy. And though they'll never speak it aloud, somewhere deep inside, they still whisper thanks to the earth that once terrified them, the same one that keeps them alive. Steam curls through the air, thick with the scent of soap and sweat and faint traces of lavender. You push open the wooden door to the bathhouse and are greeted by the sound of laughter below, echoing and oddly musical as it bounces off damp stone walls. The light inside is dim, filtered through slatted windows, and everything shimmers with a gentle haze. You step onto the slick floor, your boots leaving wet prints, and realize this place isn't just about washing the body. It's about washing away the weight of medieval life itself. In towns across Europe, bathhouses are the beating hearts of social life. From London to Prague, Paris to Lubeck, they hum with a mixture of gossip, flirtation, and the rhythmic splash of water against wood. For most people, cleanliness isn't a luxurious, a ritual, almost spiritual, though sometimes misunderstood. You've heard how peasants rarely bathed, how nobles reeked beneath layers of perfume, but that's not quite true. In the early medieval centuries, bathing was common, even encouraged by doctors who believed that a clean body reflected a balanced soul. Monasteries had their own steam rooms, and city bathhouses flourished near marketplaces, drawing crowds from dawn until nightfall. The bathhouse keeper, round woman with arms like oak branches, greets you with a grin. She gestures toward a steaming pool where men and women sit together without much modesty, chatting as if it's the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, you hesitate. The air is thick, the heat dizzying, but curiosity wins. You slip closer, watching the way conversations rise and fall, the way laughter hides under the hiss of the steam. The people here are from every walk of life. A merchant with his gold chain, a washerwoman scrubbing her elbows, a young apprentice sneaking glances at a noble's daughter who pretends not to notice. No one's pretending this is a sacred space, yet something about it feels equalizing. The usual hierarchies of medieval life, lords above peasants, below, seem to dissolve in the hot water. For an hour or two, everyone's just human. You notice the tools of the trade hanging on hooks by the wall, scrub brushes made from reeds, linen, towels, and little pouches of crushed herbs. The air smells faintly of rosemary and mint. Medieval people believed these herbs didn't just cleanse the skin, they protected the soul. A bath wasn't just physical, it was medicinal, moral, and sometimes sensual. Doctors wrote of how warm baths opened the pores to let bad humors escape, while lovers wrote of them as the perfect prelude to desire. One troubadour even composed a song about the water that softens both body and heart. You can almost imagine the church frowning from a distance, and indeed, it did. Over time, as the centuries turned, the church began to see bathhouses as places of sin disguised as cleanliness. Too much nakedness, too much laughter, too much joy. It smelled of temptation. Preachers warned that shared baths led to unclean thoughts. Some towns responded by segregating men and women, while others tried to close bathhouses altogether. But people kept coming. They couldn't resist the warmth, the companionship, the brief escape from the mud and cold of daily life. You lean against a pillar, letting the steam settle into your skin. Someone beside you, a carpenter with calloused hands, talks about the week's work, the repairs to the city gate, the new tolls imposed by the local lord. Another man jokes about the smell of fish from the market clinging to his clothes. Everyone laughs. These baths are where deals are struck, marriages arranged, rumors born. In a time when most homes are single rooms shared with animals, privacy is a dream, so people come here to breathe, to feel human again. There's a kind of intimacy here that doesn't always mean lust. Sometimes it's just closeness, the quiet understanding that everyone carries the same grime of the world. But of course, not all baths are innocent. In wealthier districts, bathhouses double as brothels. The boundary between servant and courtesan, washer and companion, blurs easily under candlelight. You've heard stories of bathmaids who offer towels and other services in the same motion. The church rails against it. Yet even bishops are rumored to visit, cloaked and silent. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were primarily places of cleanliness or clandestine pleasure. But perhaps they were both, because life itself rarely fits neat categories. You step toward a smaller chamber where the air is cooler. A boy pours water from a copper basin over your hands, and it runs slick with oil olive, scented faintly with clove. The sensation is strange and soothing. For a moment, you understand why people wrote about bathing as rebirth. After days spent trudging through mud and sweat, it feels like shedding an entire layer of the past. You close your eyes and let yourself drift, listening to the steady drip of water from the ceiling. In cities like Florence or Paris, bathhouses are elaborate affairs, tiled floors, separate rooms for steam and soaking, even musicians to entertain guests. But in smaller towns, the setup is simpler. Wooden tubs filled by hand, a fire burning all day to keep the water warm. The cost of entry is low enough that peasants can afford it once in a while. Though nobles often bathe at home, their servants hauling buckets up and down narrow stairs. You imagine a lady sitting in her perfumed tub, surrounded by rose petals, a maid brushing her hair. The medieval ideal of beauty was pale, soft, untouched by sun or labor. But even the gentlest hands still knew the sting of lye soap and the scent of ashdot. As the centuries move toward the 16th and 17th, bathing begins to change. Plague, that invisible terror, sweeps across Europe, and suddenly cleanliness becomes suspect. Doctors start warning that open pores invite disease. Better, they say, to stay dry and sealed. Wash the face, one physician advises, but not the body. And so, slowly, the bathhouses empty. The laughter fades, the fires die cold. People begin to mask odor with perfume and powder. What was once a place of life becomes a symbol of risk. You walk through an abandoned bathhouse now, its pools dry, its tiles cracked. The echoes of voices still seem to linger, as if the steam never quite left. You can almost see them, the washerwoman laughing, the merchant boasting, the young lovers exchanging glances over the rim of a basin. The memory of warmth remains even in the dust. There's a strange sadness in that. Civilization often trades comfort for caution, and what was once ordinary becomes forbidden. But not everywhere follows this decline. In some corners of Europe, Hungary, the Ottoman-ruled Balkans, even parts of Scandinavia, bathing remains sacred. Steam rooms evolve into saunas, ritualized and revered. In Japan, the onsen continues its thousand-year tradition. The human need for heat, for immersion, for connection through water never truly disappears, just shifts, surviving quietly beneath layers of fear and reform. You find yourself thinking about how water shapes civilization. It cleanses, yes, but it also reveals. To bathe is to be vulnerable, to strip away armor and pretense. In medieval times, that vulnerability was both dangerous and thrilling. Perhaps that's why the church feared it, not because of sin, but because of equality. In the bath, a king could sit beside a beggar, and for once, the world made sense. You reach down, touching the edge of an old wooden tub. The grain is rough beneath your fingers, the scent of long-vanished oils still faint. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the murmur of conversation, the low hum of humanity finding brief peace in a hard world. You picture a couple sitting close, hands brushing under the water, hearts racing in the warmth. Maybe they never spoke again after that moment, or maybe they did, years later, when both had grown old and the bathhouse was long gone. The church eventually wins its quiet war against the bath. By the 18th century, public bathing in much of Western Europe has become rare, almost scandalous. Cleanliness retreats into private homes, where tubs shrink and intimacy narrows. Yet nostalgia lingers in poems and plays the memory of shared steam, shared laughter, shared warmth. The Enlightenment brings plumbing, but not the same communal joy. The medieval bathhouse, in its humid, human imperfection, belonged to another rhythm of life. You step outside again, into the evening air. The cool wind feels sharper after the heavy heat. The village is quiet now, the smoke from chimneys rising like thin ghosts. Somewhere, a river glints under moonlight, steady and eternal. The same water that once filled the baths now moves silently through fields and forests, washing away centuries of laughter and sin. As you walk, you realize something. In a world where so much was hardship, war, famine, disease, the bathhouse was one of the few places people could feel alive, clean, and connected. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was about humanity. For a few hours, stripped of filth and status, they could remember what it meant to simply exist in their bodies, without shame or fear. You glance back once more, and in your mind, the old bathhouse still glows. The steam swirls again, the laughter returns, and for a heartbeat, the past breathes. You can almost feel the warmth against your skin, the sound of water lapping softly like a lullaby. Then it fades, leaving only the chill of night and the quiet certainty that the medieval world, harsh as it was understood, something modern life often forgets, that water doesn't just cleanse, it connects. The smell of crushed herbs fills the air long before you reach the healer's hut. The scent is sharp and earthy: rose, merry sage, maybe rue, and it cuts through the damp chill that clings to the forest's edge. You follow a narrow path lined with stones, each one flecked with moss, until you see her silhouettes through the smoke. A woman bent over a wooden table, grinding something in a mortar. The rhythmic scrape of pestle against stone sounds almost like a heartbeat. She doesn't look up when you enter, but she knows you're there. She always knows. This is the world of medieval medicine, the uneasy meeting point between faith folklore, and the fragile beginnings of science. In this world, the body is a mystery. The soul is fragile, and every ache might be a punishment, a curse, or just bad air. You sit by the hearth, watching her work. On the shelves around her, jars of dried plants stand beside small bones, eggshells, feathers, and strange lumps of amber resin. Each has its purpose, each has a story, and though doctors in universities are beginning to talk of humors and balance, here, in this dim hut at the edge of the woods, healing still feels like a kind of quiet magic. She hands you a cup filled with dark liquid. It smells awful but feels warm in your palms. Drink, she says softly, and don't ask what's in it. You obey, because trust is all you have. The taste burns your tongue bitter, metallic, but a strange calm settles over you. Maybe it's real medicine, maybe it's suggestion, maybe it's hope. In the Middle Ages, those three were often the same thing. Across Europe, the understanding of the human body sits somewhere between ancient philosophy and divine mystery. The four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, govern everything from health to personality. If you're melancholic, it means your black bile runs too strong. If you're quick-tempered, too much yellow bile. Doctors bleed patients to restore balance, using leeches or sharp blades, believing the crimson flow carries sickness away. It sounds barbaric, but in its time, it's the best logic they have. And yet, outside the stone halls of universities, it's people like the healer who truly keep villages alive. She knows how to use willow bark for pain, nettles for blood, honey for wounds. She's seen enough births and deaths to know what works and what doesn't. To the church, she's suspicious. To her neighbors, she's indispensable. When the priest fails, they come to her with offerings: bread, salt, coins, sometimes nothing but gratitude. The line between medicine and magic is thin, almost invisible. A prayer whispered over a poultice isn't superstition, it's insurance. Every cure has two parts: the herb and the faith that it will work. And sometimes it does. A poultice of honey and garlic can keep infection at bay. A tincture of belladonna can ease pain if it doesn't kill you first. You realize medieval healing is as much art as science. And every success is a gamble played against death. In the cities, learned physicians wear long robes and carry canes topped with carved ivory. They speak Latin and quote Galen, the ancient Greek authority whose ideas have ruled medicine for 1,000 years. To them, the body is a vessel of balance. The stars dictate its health, and sin can manifest as sickness. They prescribe enemas, baths, and sometimes music to soothe the soul, but their services are costly, far beyond the reach of peasants. So while nobles summon physicians, the poor depend on cunning women, midwives, and traveling apothecaries who sell powders in little cloth bags. Historians still argue whether those village healers were truly wise or merely lucky. But you can see the truth in her steady hands. She knows when fever is fatal and when to wait. She knows which herbs soothe childbirth and which end it. That last knowledge is dangerous, deadly even. The church forbids any act that prevents conception or ends pregnancy, calling it heresy against creation. Yet, in quiet corners, women share whispered recipes: pennyroyal in tea, tansy mixed with honey, the bark of juniper boiled into bitter brew. Some work, many don't. And when they don't, the blame falls not on God, but on the woman who dared to interfere with his plan. The healer sighs and adds more wood to the fire. Its glow reveals scars on her forearms, old burns, perhaps from boiling pitch or candle wax. She looks tired, older than she is, as if she's spent too long negotiating with suffering. They come to me when they want life, she says quietly, and they come again when they want death. The church calls both sins, but who else listens? You think about that as she turns back to her work. In the medieval mind, healing and sin are forever tangled. To ease pain is mercy, but to control the body is pride. The body itself is seen as dangerous, especially women's bodies. Midwives are both revered and feared. They bring life into the world, but if a child dies, suspicion turns quickly to witchcraft. You can almost hear the murmurs behind closed shutters. She took too long. She used the wrong herbs. She spoke to the devil. And yet, despite fear, childbirth remains their domain. No male doctor dares enter the birthing room. Only women mothers, sisters, neighbors, cluster around, praying as the screams rise and fall. The healer stands at the center, hands sure and steady, murmuring to both woman and child. She ties cords, measures breath, whispers charms, half Christian, half pagan. When the baby cries, everyone exhales in relief. But if silence follows, the room turns cold. Someone crosses herself. Someone else looks at the healer, eyes sharp. Still, the cycle continues. Disease, birth, fever, plague. Each season brings new suffering, new cures. You find yourself wondering what it feels like to live in a world where every sickness has both a natural and supernatural cause. A headache could mean bad air or bad spirits. A rash could come from spoiled mature, the devil's touch. Medicine isn't just about herbs, it's about belief, and that belief often decides who lives and who dies. The 14th century brings the Black Death, and with it, chaos. You walk through towns where streets are silent, except for the tolling of bells. Bodies lie stacked like firewood. Physicians wear long-beaked masks stuffed with herbs, thinking the fragrance will ward off plague vapors. But the smell of death is everywhere, too thick to disguise. The healer works until her hands shake, tending to the sick, even as others flee. When she falls ill herself, no one dares approach her door. Fear has become stronger than faith. When she recovers, her world has changed. The church claims the plague was punishment. Doctors blame the stars. Peasants blame each other. Witch trials begin soon after, fed by terror and ignorance. Healers, especially women who live alone, become easy targets. You can feel the tension rising in every village. A failed harvest, a child's death, a sudden illness. Each tragedy demands a culprit, and the healer, with her jars of roots and whispered words, becomes the perfect scapegoat. Still, her knowledge survives in secret. Hidden books, coded recipes, herbal charms sewn into clothing. She teaches apprentices quietly, pretending it's all harmless superstition. They learn how to mix vinegar with rosemary to disinfect wounds, how to make poultices from comfrey leaves, how to ease coughs with licorice and thyme. Science hasn't yet arrived, but experience speaks louder than scripture. By the 16th century, alchemy begins to merge with medicine. Scholars in smoky laboratories melt metals, distill spirits, and accidentally invent chemistry. You watch them peer into bubbling flasks, convinced they're on the brink of finding the elixir of life. Their ideas sound wild, but some discoveries endure distillation, alcohol-based tinctures, antiseptics. Slowly, the mystical begins to give way to the measurable. But out in the countryside, nothing much changes. The healer's granddaughter still works by firelight, still measures with her fingers, still whispers the same words her grandmother did. You leave the hut at last, stepping into a field where night is settling in. Fireflies blink over the grass like tiny souls. The world smells alive, earth smoke, lavender. Somewhere, a church bell tolls for vespers. You realize the medieval people lived in constant negotiation between heaven and earth. They prayed for miracles but trusted in herbs. They confessed sins on Sunday and boiled remedies on Monday. The modern world will call them ignorant, but maybe they understood something deeper, that health isn't just the absence of penance, the balance between body, mind, and mystery, that sometimes the act of believing you can be healed is half the cure itself. You glance back at the healer's hut, its window glowing faintly through the dark. Inside, she moves like a shadow among shelves of secrets. Her hands are steady, her faith unshaken, not in the church, not in the stars, but in the simple power of tending, listening, mending. In a world ruled by suffering, that's the closest thing to salvation anyone could offer. You walk on a night growing colder, and think about how her story repeats across centuries, from forest huts to hospitals, from whispered charms to modern prescriptions. The healer's spirit endures. She bridges worlds, the divine and the earthly, the scientific and the sacred. And maybe, even now, in a time of electric lights and sterile rooms, a small part of that medieval magic remains in every act of care. The stars overhead glimmer faintly, ancient and constant. You imagine her looking up once, whispering to them as she ties a bundle of herbs for the next patient. Her faith isn't in miracles, it's in the work itself. And as you turn toward the village, you carry her scent on your clothes, smoke, rosemary, and the quiet defiance of someone who believes that even in the darkest age, healing is still possible. The morning mist drifts low over the water, turning the harbor into a dreamscape of half-seen masts and ghostly sails. You stand at the edge of the pier, watching as a merchant ship creaks against its moorings. Men shout to one another in a dozen accents, the air thick with the smells of salt, pitch, and spice. Somewhere a bell rings, and gulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp against the hum of trade. This is a medieval port at its height, bustling, noisy, alive with ambition. Every crate, every coin, every whispered bargain carries the weight of empires. You step closer, feeling the damp wood beneath your boots, and see dockworkers rolling barrels marked with strange symbols. Some hold grain, others wine, others fine cloth, from lands so distant they sound like myths. The merchants bark orders, their hands glinting with rings. These are the new aristocrats, the lords of commerce. They may not wield swords, but their influence reaches farther than most kings. Gold, not blood, rules this world now. The medieval economy, once bound to the rhythms of soil and harvest, has begun to move with the tides. Trade routes stretch like veins across the map, from the wool markets of England to the spice ports of the Levant, from the silver mines of Bohemia to the silks of Venice. Ships carry not just goods but ideas, languages, and diseases. You realize that every sack of pepper and roll of silk hides a web of unseen connections. You walk through the marketplace, where traders have set up beneath colored awnings. The air is alive with sound, haggling, laughter, the rhythmic ring of coins hitting scales. A cloth seller calls out in French, an apothecary in Italian. A Moorish trader displays blue glass bottles filled with oils that shimmer like captured light. There are spices here that smell like paradise: cinnamon, saffron, cloves, and dyes so deep they make the sky seem pale. A woman selling figs smiles as you pass. The fruit tastes like sun and memory, for all its filth and fear. The medieval world is far from static. It's a place of motion, pilgrims walking dusty roads, merchants crossing seas, scholars carrying books from city to city. Every journey reshapes the map, both real and imagined. The Crusades have opened paths between East and West, bringing new foods, fabrics, and philosophies. Trade has become pilgrimage of another kind. a devotion to wealth, risk, and discovery. In the distance, you hear the clang of metal, the forge where ships are born. Blacksmiths hammer iron into nails, chain, and anchor. The shipwrights chant in rhythm as they bend the timbers into shape, sealing each seam with tar and wool. The ship beside them will soon sail to Alexandria, its hold full of English wool, returning months later with silk, pepper, and stories of heat so fierce it melts metal. You climb aboard one of the ships preparing to leave. The deck rocks gently beneath your feet. A sailor nods as he passes, his beard crusted with salt, his hands scarred from rope burns. He laughs when you ask if he fears the voyage. Always, he says, but fear feeds the wind. His words linger as the ship slips away from the dock, the sails filling like lungs. The coast recedes until it's just a line between grey sea and grey sky. Days pass. The sea becomes a world of its own, vast, endless, indifferent. You learn quickly how fragile life is out here. A single storm can turn wealth into wreckage. Lightning splits the sky, and the deck becomes a chaos of shouting and crashing. Water pours through the hatches, and you cling to the mast, tasting salt and terror. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm passes, leaving silence and exhaustion in its wake. The sailors pray, some to Christ, some to nameless gods of the deep. No one questions the others. Out here, survival is faith enough. When the ship reaches port again, this time in a city of stone towers and domes that shimmer in the heat, you feel as if you've stepped into another world. The marketplace glows with color, carpets, copper, figs, and almonds. The smell of roasted lamb and incense wraps around you. Traders from across the Mediterranean crowd the square, their words blending into a music of commerce. You hear Greek, Arabic, Latin, Persian. It's not just goods being traded here, it's knowledge. Scholars sit beneath arcades, arguing about medicine and mathematics. Scribes copy texts in languages you can't name. This is the hidden legacy of trade, the exchange of thought. While Europe struggles with superstition and war, ideas flow silently through ports and markets. A merchant's cargo might include not only silk, but manuscripts, ancient Greek treatises preserved by Arab scholars, ready to spark new light in the dark corners of monasteries. It's easy to forget that the Renaissance begins not in a royal court, but in places like this, where gold and ink mix freely. You sit beside a fountain and watch a boy chase pigeons through the square. A friar nearby preaches against greed, warning that wealth corrupts the soul. But even he carries a pouch of coins at his belt. The contradiction is everywhere. The church condemns avarice, yet it taxes trade. Pilgrims journey to holy sites, but stop to buy relics and charms along the way. In truth, the medieval world is already modern in its contradictions, devout yet pragmatic, spiritual yet obsessed with profit. On your return voyage, you share a cabin with a merchant who tells you he's made and lost fortunes 3 times. The sea gives, he says, and then it takes, like God, but less forgiving. He shows you a small wooden chest filled with coins from a dozen realms, each stamped with a king's face. They're all different, yet all serve the same purpose: the illusion of stability in a world that shifts like the tide. When the ship docks again in Europe, the air feels colder, heavier. You walk through narrow streets, slick with rain. The merchants here are just as loud, just as hungry, but the city feels divided between old power and new. The nobles cling to their land, while the merchants build fortunes on ships and ledgers. Gold begins to outweigh bloodlines. You can sense a quiet revolution forming in every counting house and guild hall. Guilds control the crafts, now carpenters, weavers, masons, Each member swears oaths, learns secrets, and guards them fiercely. The guild is family, shield, and ladder. Through it, a peasant's son might become a master's son a merchant, and a merchant's grandson perhaps a gentleman. The rigid hierarchy of feudal life begins to crack, replaced by something subtler but no less powerful: ambition. You pause by a tavern where sailors drink, their laughter spilling into the night. They tell tales of the new world, not yet real in this age, but dreamed of, whispered about. Somewhere beyond the horizon, they say, lies a place where gold grows like wheat. You realize that medieval trade is already stretching toward that dream, the same hunger that will one day send explorers westward. The line between merchant and conqueror is thin. As night falls, the city glows with torchlight. You walk past the counting houses, where clerks scratch numbers by candlelight, their ink-stained fingers moving like spiders. Each mark they make decides who will eat and who will starve. Commerce has become a new kind of power, invisible but vast, and with it comes corruption. Bribes pass beneath tables, debts buy influence, coins reshape justice, kings borrow from bankers, then kneel to them. You remember the healer's hut, the monastery, the peasant's field all, the earlier worlds you've passed through on. See how this one builds upon them. The old magic of herbs has become alchemy of money. The same faith that once cured sickness now drives trade. Men still pray, but more often they pray for profit. A beggar tugs at your sleeve, asking for bread. His eyes are hollow, his hands trembling. Behind him, a merchant counts gold. You give the beggar a coin, but he looks more afraid than grateful. They'll take it from me, he whispers, glancing toward the guards. You realize wealth creates as much suffering as it cures. Prosperity has its own plague, one that eats hearts instead of bodies. Still, the city hums with life. Bells ring from cathedrals, ships creak in the harbor, laughter echoes from the taverns. The medieval world, for all its cruelty, is alive with motion. You can feel history gathering speed beneath your feet, ready to burst into something new. As you walk back toward the docks, the fog begins to rise again, wrapping the city in silver. You think of all the hands that shaped this age, the farmers, the healers, the builders, the sailors. Each one carried a fragment of change without knowing it. Together they've built a bridge between darkness and dawn. You stop at the edge of the pier, watching a ship glide into the mist. Somewhere out there, beyond sight, new worlds are forming, worlds of trade, of exploration, of empire. The medieval age is ending, but its heartbeat still echoes in the waves. You listen, and for a moment, you think you can hear it clearly. The steady rhythm of oars, the whisper of sails, the murmur of 1,000 dreams carried by the wind. You stay there until the last ship disappears into the horizon, the smell of salt and smoke fading into night. The world feels bigger, no dangerous, yes, but full of possibility. The sea that once divided lands now binds them, and every voyage, every bargain, every storm carries the promise of what's to come. And though the medieval age may never know it, this restless hunger that drive to explore, to connect, to possess, will shape everything that follows. You walk through the narrowest street of the city, where the air smells of damp stone, ale, and sweat. The cobblestones glisten under lantern light, and laughter drifts through the fog like perfume. Somewhere ahead, a door creaks open and closes again, muffled by the hum of voices. You've stepped into the city's other half, the one that pretends not to exist by day but thrives by night. This is where pleasure becomes profession, where law and desire meet in an uneasy truce. Welcome to the world of brothels, bawds, and the business of sin. The sign above the first house is painted with a faded red heart. A candle burns in the window, steady and soft. You knock once, not sure what to expect, and a woman's voice calls from within. She opens the door, her face half hidden beneath a silk scarf. "Looking for warmth, traveler?" she asks, not unkindly. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of rose oil and smoke. The room glows in shades of amber candles flickering against worn tapestries, shadows dancing on the ceiling. Women sit on low benches, combing their hair, laughing in low tones. They glance up as you enter, measuring your clothes, your posture, the way your eyes move. In this place, attention is currency. These brothels are more organized than you'd think. In medieval cities from London to Venice, Paris to Prague, prostitution is not exactly hidden, it's tolerated, regulated, even taxed. Town councils issue licenses, churchmen preach against lust, and yet the same authorities visit quietly after dusk. The hypocrisy is as thick as the perfume in the air. A ledger lies open near the door, recording each night's earnings. The madam, or abbess, as she's mockingly called, keeps everything in order. She pays her dues to the city guard, to the tax collector, sometimes even to the bishop's steward. Everyone profits from what's supposed to be a sin. The women who work here come from everywhere. Some are widows, others cast out by families, some stolen as children or sold into servitude. A few, though, have chosen this life not for pleasure, but for survival. The wages are better than scrubbing floors or begging at church steps. You see them share bread, fix one another's hair, whisper jokes. There's sisterhood here, strange and fragile, built from necessity. One of them, a red-haired woman named Elise, tells you that she used to work in a noble household. "My mistress's husband couldn't tell his prayers from his urges," she says, pouring wine into your cup. "I learned early that virtue feeds no one." You take a sip. The wine is cheap, but warm. Music drifts up from the street, bilolutes and laughter, the kind that covers pain with noise. Elise gestures toward a carved figure on the mantel. Venus, worn smooth by touch. "They call her a goddess," she says, "but she never paid rent." You can't help but laugh. The humor cuts through the heaviness. A brief reminder that people have always found ways to make sense of contradiction. Outside, the city keeps its double face. During daylight, priests thunder about purity from cathedral pulpits. At night, some of them slip through the alleys, hoods pulled low, to the same red doors. Historians still argue whether this tolerance was pragmatic or perverse. Way to protect respectable women by containing men's desire, or simply a way to collect one more tax. Either way, the brothel becomes an institution, as inevitable as the tavern or the church. You step back into the street, your breath turning to mist. Farther down, the noise grows louder. This is the cheaper quarter, where pleasure costs less and danger more. Here, the houses lean so close together you can touch both walls at once. Candlelight leaks through cracks in the shutters, and the air tastes of ale and unwashed skin. A man stumbles past, his arm around a woman whose laughter sounds like defiance. She catches your eye and winks. For her, every glance is a transaction, every step a risk. The city guards patrol in pairs, pretending not to see. Some take coin for silence, others take other kinds of payment. Morality bends easily when gold is involved. You overhear one guard joke to another. "We keep order by spending it." They laugh, but there's no joy in the sound. Inside another house, the atmosphere changes. This one is cleaner, quieter, more discreet. The clientele here includes clerks, merchants, and even minor nobles. A musician plays softly in the corner. his eyes closed as he plucks the strings of a lute. The women wear fine dresses, though the seams are patched, the jewelry imitation. You watch a merchant hand over a purse of silver as if making a holy offering. His hands tremble, not from lust, but from guilt. You wonder if he'll confess tomorrow or simply forget. The church's stance on prostitution is a tangle of contradiction. Some theologians, like St. Augustine, argued that it was a necessary evil, a pressure valve that kept society from worse sins. Others demanded its total eradication. Yet wherever it was banned, it returned, slipping through cracks in morality like water through stone. Theologians debated purity. The streets whispered reality. You find yourself walking toward the outskirts, where the brothels fade into shadow. Here, the trade turns rougher. The women are younger, their faces harder, their eyes wary. A few men linger in doorways, watching for guards or customers. Poverty presses on the air like fog. You realize how thin the line is between survival and ruin. For every madam in her candlelit parlor, there are 10 who sleep in alleys. One step from starvation, a whisper reaches Uramas of a scandal. A nobleman, they say, was found in a house of ill repute, disguised as a monk. His family paid dearly to bury the story. Gossip spreads faster than plague, and in the medieval city, shame is a weapon sharper than any sword. You can almost see the smirks behind closed shutters. The sermons adjusted for the following Sunday as you wander back toward the center. You notice a building with barred windows and a sign marked by a red cross. It's not a church, but a hospital, a place for fallen women. Inside, nuns tend to the sick, offering water and prayer. The smell of vinegar fills the air. The women here have been rescued, though their faces suggest otherwise. Some clutch rosaries, others stare at the wall. Redemption, it seems, feels a lot like imprisonment. A nun greets you softly. She says, they pray for souls lost to temptation, but her eyes betray fatigue. Sin is easy to find, she says, harder to heal. You ask her whether she believes these women deserve forgiveness. She looks at you a long moment before answering, we all do, but not all of us are offered it. Her words linger as you leave, echoing against the stone walls. You make your way through a narrow gate that leads back to the main road. Lanterns swing in the wind, and the city hums like a living thing. For a moment, you understand why people keep coming back here to the light, the sound, the pretense of warmth. The brothel isn't just a place of sin, it's a mirror of society itself, showing what it refuses to see in daylight. Desire, hypocrisy, power, they all live under the same roof. At the edge of the market square, you see a crowd gathering. A preacher stands on a barrel, shouting about the wrath of God. He points toward the red district, calling it a pit of corruption. The crowd murmurs in agreement, though half of them have likely walked those streets themselves. Repent, he cries, voice cracking. The wages of sin are death. You glance around and see the merchants counting coins, the guards looking bored, the beggars unmoved. In a way, everyone here is a participant in the same quiet bargain. The preacher's voice fades behind you as you turn down another street. The city seems to exhale, tired of pretending. You catch sight of Elise again, standing in a doorway, her scarf pulled tight against the chill. She smiles faintly when she sees you. Still wandering, she asks. You nod. Then take this, she says, pressing a small charm into your palm, a piece of ribbon tied around a coin. For luck, she adds. You thank her, though you're not sure who needs luck more, her or the city that feeds on her work. As dawn approaches, the lanterns go out one by one. The red lights fade, the laughter dims, and the streets fall silent except for the rustle of brooms sweeping away the night's secrets. The city transforms again, respectable, solemn, ready for prayer. But you've seen the other half, the one that never truly sleeps. Behind every confession, every sermon, every marriage bed, lies the shadow of these streets. Historians still argue whether the brothel was a symptom or a solution. Did it corrupt men, or simply reflect their nature? The truth lies somewhere in between. The medieval world, for all its piety, was built on contradiction. It preached chastity, yet sold indulgence. It punished women for sinning, yet depended on them to absorb desire's cost. The brothel was both refuge and trap, business and blasphemy, condemned by the same hands that paid for its survival. You walk away as the sun rises over the rooftops, painting the city gold. The scent of bread replaces that of incense and wine. Shopkeepers lift their shutters, pretending the night never happened, but the cobblestones remember the laughter, the bargains, the unspoken prayers. In their worn surfaces lies the story of 1,000 lives hidden between virtue and necessity. As you reach the city gate, you turn back once more. The streets look innocent again, but you know better. Beneath the daylight order hums the heartbeat of the night, steady, ancient, human. And as you leave, you realize that what you've seen isn't just medieval, it's timeless. The rain begins before dawn, tapping lightly on the leaded windows of a stone manor. You lie awake, listening to it mingle with the distant toll of a church bell. Inside these thick walls, life feels quiet, almost reverent. But beneath that stillness hides a cold truth. Marriage, in the medieval sense, is rarely about love. It's about land, lineage, and legacy. The bedchamber upstairs is not a sanctuary but a contract sealed by flesh. You walk the corridor and stop by an open doorway. Inside, a lady sits before a mirror, her maid brushing her hair. The strands shine like gold in the candlelight, but her face is pale, solemn. Tonight, she will share her husband's bed for the first time, or rather, fulfill her duty. The union has already been arranged, blessed, witnessed, and recorded. What remains is the part no one speaks of, the consummation that proves her worth to her husband and his heirs. Her hands tremble slightly as she smooths the embroidered linen gown. When you look closer, you realize she's barely 16. Down the hall, the groom, older, heavy with wine and expectation, waits with his companions. They jest loudly, pretending not to notice the silence in the air. For noblemen, marriage is a business deal disguised as a sacrament. His wealth merges with her dowry, their families' alliances secured like stones in a fortress. Yet he knows that if no child comes, the whispers will begin, and soon those whispers will cut like knives. Fertility is currency, and the woman bears the blame when fortune falters. You slip away before the candles burn down, out into the garden where the rain has softened the earth. Servants move quietly, setting out herbs for morning tea. They live by another rhythm, one of toil, gossip, and resignation. Among the peasants, marriage is simpler but no gentler. Love may spark it, but survival sustains it. A peasant couple's bed is made of straw, their vows as much to hunger as to each other. In a low thatched cottage nearby, a woman stirs a pot while her husband mends a broken hoe. They don't speak much, words are precious when days repeat themselves. Still, there's a tenderness in the silence. They've shared sickness and storms, births and burials. Their intimacy is less about desire and more about endurance. They might laugh together on feast days, or share a whispered joke beneath the covers while the wind howls. Yet even here, the church dictates their bodies' rules: when they may touch, when they must abstain, which positions are holy and which invite damnation. You remember hearing a priest once warn that lovemaking during Lent might bring deformed children. Another claimed that passion itself was sinful, unless aimed at procreation. Historians still argue whether such restrictions were truly enforced or merely preached. But either way, guilt became part of the bed. Even love, when mixed with pleasure, was something to confess. In noble houses, the rules grow more intricate. Marriages are alliances written in ink and blood, complete with dowry clauses, inheritance stipulations, and escape routes disguised as a knot. When you visit the scriptorium of a small monastery, a monk shows you a stack of such documents. Every word here, he says, is meant to protect a name, not a heart. His ink-stained fingers trace the Latin phrases, legitimate heirs, property lines, divine blessing. The irony isn't lost on him. We bind people like books, he adds softly, but we never check whether the pages match. Sometimes they don't. You pass through a castle courtyard where two lovers meet in secret. The woman's dress is simple, the man's cloak marked with her husband's crest. Their hands brush only once before parting, but that single touch burns brighter than the candles inside the great hall. Forbidden love is the one luxury nobles can't buy yet never stop seeking. Troubadours immortalize it in song, poets in verse, and every whispered ballad hides a true story. Love letters slip between prayer books, carried by servants who know too much. But not all stories end in romance. You hear of a young wife accused of adultery, dragged before a court of men in robes. Her defense matters less than her lineage. If she's lucky, she'll be sent to a convent. If not, her fate will be decided by gossip and God's supposed will. Her husband, meanwhile, will remarry without question. The double standard lies heavy in the air, like the smoke of the torches that light the courtroom. You continue walking through the estate's outer fields, where servants labor in the drizzle. Marriage for them is less contract and more survival pact. A woman's worth lies in her hands, how well she can spin, cook, or nurse. A man's worth lies in his back, how long he can plow or fight. Affection is a luxury, reliability a necessity. And yet, in these muddy fields, real devotion sometimes grows unspoken, unrecorded, but enduring. You see an old couple working side by side, their movements synchronized after decades of shared routine. When the man pauses to wipe his brow, the woman hands him a cloth without looking. That small gesture carries a lifetime's understanding. Back at the manor, the newlyweds dine in silence. A minstrel plays softly while servants pour wine. You can almost taste the tension in the room, the awkwardness of two strangers expected to become family overnight. Later, as the guests drift away and the candles gutter low, the ritual resumes. In some noble houses, witnesses are even present to confirm the union. Curtains may be drawn, but privacy remains a luxury reserved for dreams. When the chamber door closes, the lady stares at the embroidered ceiling and wonders if she's done everything right. The bedclothes will be checked in the morning for signs of virtue, proof not of love, but of purity. You imagine the pressure of that expectation, the loneliness of a girl turned symbol overnight. If a child is born, she will be praised for doing her duty. If not, she will be pitied, or worse, blamed. The burden of legacy rests entirely on her body. Historians still debate how much affection existed in these arranged marriages. Some letters between spouses hint at genuine tenderness. Others read like treaties, yet even in the coldest unions, sparks of humanity persist. A husband grieving his wife's death, a wife defending her absent husband's honor. Such moments remind you that beneath every title, there beats a human heart. You travel next to a small village chapel, where a wedding is underway. The couple stands barefoot before the priest, hands joined by a strip of cloth. It's a simple ritual, half sacred, half superstition. The villagers watch, some smiling, others whispering bets on how long the union will last. As the couple kisses, the crowd cheers, not from romance, but relief to more souls secured against hunger and loneliness. Later, they'll dance in the mud, drink too much ale, and sing until dawn. For a few hours, the world will feel merciful. But not all marriages are equal. Some women find themselves trapped in cruel households, with no escape except death or the convent. The church rarely grants annulments, and even then, only to the powerful. One widow you meet tells you she'd rather face hunger than another husband. A man's vow is a promise, she says. A woman's is a sentence. Her voice is calm, not bitter, as she tends the garden of the convent that took her in the 15th century. As Europe begins to change, marriage begins to shift to, with trade rising and cities growing, new classes emergence, artisans, scholars, among them, love starts to sneak into the equation. A merchant's daughter might marry for companionship as well as advantage. Letters become more personal, more sincere. You read one by candlelight. I miss your laughter when I wake, though the bed is warm. Such words, though rare, signal something newer, quiet rebellion against centuries of cold formality. By the 17th and 18th centuries, this change becomes more visible. Portraits of couples show softer gazes, hands touching naturally. Love is no longer seen only as folly, but as something worth striving for, at least among those who can afford it. Still, in the countryside, the old ways linger. Contracts are signed, dowries exchanged, and hearts remain secondary to harvests. As night deepens, you find yourself back beneath the manor's window. The rain has stopped, leaving the garden slick and shining. You hear laughter faintly from the great hall, the young couple's guests, drinking to their future. Inside, perhaps they are speaking awkwardly, trying to bridge the space between duty and desire. You hope, for their sake, that warmth finds its way between them. For all its rules and hypocrisies, medieval marriage endures because it must. It keeps fields tilled, names remembered, fortunes secure. And yet, beneath that weight, people still find ways to carve out moments of softness, an exchanged glance, a shared smile, a quiet kindness that defies the contract. That you walk away from the manor. The first light of dawn creeps over the fields, smoke rises from cottages, roosters call, and life begins again. The world turns, indifferent to love or law. But somewhere inside those stone walls and thatched roofs, two people wake beside each other, bound not by parchment or priest, but by the fragile, stubborn rhythm of human need. The first thing you notice is the quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that lingers after something breaks. In the dim glow of the hearth, an empty chair sits beside the bed, its woven seat worn smooth from years of use. You imagine the woman who once sat there, mending clothes or spinning thread while her husband read aloud from a weathered psalter. Now she's gone, and the air carries the faint scent of rosemary, used to mask the smell of death in medieval life. Death was constant company. It didn't come with warning or ceremony, but drifted through doors like smoke. You could meet it in childbirth, on the road, at war, or in your sleep. To live was to walk beside it, to share your table and prayers with the knowledge that any day might be your last. The people of that time did not romanticize it, but neither did they hide from it. They built rituals around it, layers of faith and superstition meant to give shape to something too large to understand. You walk through the village churchyard, where rows of wooden crosses lean toward the earth. Some bear names, most do not. Children play nearby, unbothered by the graves The boundary between life and death here is thinner than you're used to. The church bell tolls, a single, solemn note that rolls across the fields. A burial is underway. Villagers gather around a shallow pit, while a priest in a mud-stained robe murmurs Latin prayers. The body, wrapped in linen, is lowered into the earth. Someone sprinkles holy water. Someone else weeps softly. When the final clod of dirt falls, the mourners cross themselves and turn back toward their cottages. There's no marble, no flowers, just a mound of earth and faith to hold back the dark. Death is not an interruption, it's part of the rhythm. Babies are baptized with the same water that blesses the dead, and the same bell that rings for weddings tolls for funerals. It's all one cycle, and everyone knows their place in it. Inside the church, candles flicker before a painted crucifix. The priest's voice echoes through the cold stone. Requiem, aeternam, dona, Ais Domini, eternal rest grant unto them. O Lord, you stand among villagers who can't understand the words, but understand their meaning. To die well in the medieval world was as important as living rightly. The soul's journey mattered more than the body's end. But fear lingered, fear of purgatory, of judgment, of sins left unconfessed. The church taught that the dead did not simply vanish. They waited, somewhere between heaven and hell, for the living to remember them. Masses were paid for, candles lit, prayers whispered to ease their suffering. Even the poorest peasant might save a coin for a priest to speak his name after death. To be forgotten was the truest death of all. You wander beyond the village, where the forest grows thick and quiet. Here death takes on another shape. The peasants tell stories of spirits who wander after dark, souls denied rest for crimes or oaths broken, the restless dead. They're called ghosts, who linger near crossroads or wells, crying for release. A mother might warn her child not to stray after sunset, lest the spirits catch them. Some of these tales are born of fear, others of longing. Grief needs a shape, and ghosts are the easiest to imagine. In a nearby town, you watch a funeral for a night. His body, armored and still, lies on a bier surrounded by flickering torches. The air smells of beeswax and incense. Monks chant as his widow kneels beside him, veiled in black. Her face is calm, but her hands tremble. When the service ends, squires lift the coffin and carry it to the crypt beneath the chapel. Down there, amid the chill and echo, generations of his family sleep in carved stone coffins, their hands eternally folded in prayer. His name will be added to the line, his deeds remembered in song, but his body, like all the rest, will return to dust. For the nobility, death is legacy. Tombs are monuments to lineage, effigies carved to outlast the flesh. For peasants, it's simplicity. Hole in the earth, a shared sorrow, a hope that the harvest will still come. Yet across rank and faith, the same truth binds them all. Death levels everything, the lord and the laborer, the maiden and the monk. They all feed the same soil in the end. You pause at a small hut on the edge of the forest, where a woman tends to the dying. She's not a nun or midwife, though she knows a bit of both arts. People call her when someone's fever won't break or when a newborn refuses to breathe. Tonight, an old man lies on her cot, whispering prayers. She dips a cloth in cool water and presses it to his lips. "Go easy," she says, not to comfort, but to guide. In her voice, there's no fear, only familiarity. She's seen too many deaths to count. When his breathing stills, she closes his eyes and crosses his hands over his chest. Then she whispers a short blessing, not from scripture, but from memory, something older than the church itself. Outside, she hangs the linen from the window to signal the passing. Soon the bell will toll, and the neighbors will come to help dig the grave. There's no weeping yet, that comes later. When the chores are done, you think about how differently people now handle death hidden in hospitals, dressed in silence. The medieval world faced it head-on. Death was not failure, it was proof of being alive. Even children, who buried their playmates before they learned to write, grew up understanding that grief was not weakness but duty. Later that night, you find yourself standing again by the churchyard. The moonlight turns the crosses silver, and the world feels suspended between breaths. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls. You imagine all the lives beneath the earth, the laughter, the toil, the whispered prayers. None of them knew their stories would vanish into dust. Yet each one mattered while it lasted. A figure approaches from the path, a boy carrying a candle. He stops at one grave, kneels, and murmurs something too soft to hear. Then he places a sprig of lavender at the mound and leaves. You wonder who he's visiting, a mother, a father, a friend. It doesn't matter. What matters is that someone still remembers, in the end. That's what medieval death teaches you. Not despair, but continuity. Every bell that tolls, every prayer whispered into the dark, every grave tended by trembling hands is a thread in the vast, unending fabric of human endurance. They feared death, yes, but they also accepted it as the bridge between worlds, a passage, not a void. When dawn comes, the mist rises over the graves, soft and forgiving. The church doors open for morning mass, and villagers file in, carrying their sorrows like old cloaks. The world moves on, quietly, but surely. Somewhere, a baby cries, and an old woman smiles through her tears. Life and death, intertwined, as they always have been. You wake to a new kind of dawn. The air no longer smells of wood smoke and dung, but of ink, metal, and the faint sweetness of burning coal. It's the 17th century now, and the medieval world you've trudged through for so long is shedding its skin. Cities are swelling, scholars are experimenting, and curiosity, once chained by fear, is beginning to roam freely. You can feel it in the way people talk about the body, no longer as a vessel of sin but as a marvel of design waiting to be understood. In a narrow London workshop, a man leans over an open cadaver by candlelight. His name is William Harvey, and he's about to map the circulation of blood, something no one before him has fully grasped. You watch his pen scratch notes beside a still hand, the heart open like a puzzle. There's awe here, not horror. The human body, once sacred and forbidden, is slowly becoming a field of study. Knowledge is shifting from the pulpit to the laboratory, and with that shift comes a quieter revolution. The way people think about desire, no longer entirely bound by the church's iron rules. Men and women begin to see their appetites as part of nature, not rebellion against it. Physicians publish books on reproduction that use words once whispered behind veils. Philosophers debate love as an emotional force rather than a sin. You hear them in coffee houses, their voices rising over the hum of conversations discussing anatomy, soul, and the strange pull between the two. The Enlightenment is stirring, and reason is its banner. But reason doesn't kill superstition overnight, just dresses it in finer clothes. People still buy love charms, still consult midwives for fertility spells, still whisper of witches who can curse a man's potency. Yet side by side with those old fears, new sciences emerge. Alchemists become chemists, astrologers morph into astronomers, and the study of pleasure, once banned, is folded into medicine and philosophy alike. You travel to Paris, where salons glow with candlelight and powdered wigs, nod thoughtfully as scholars read aloud from their newest essays. One writer claims that passion is essential to the soul's health. Another insists it clouds reason. You sip imaginary wine and smile, realizing how little humanity has changed. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment liberated love or merely redefined it. The artists of this era joined the conversation in their own way. Painters trade medieval saints for mythic lovers, Venus reclining on silk, Apollo chasing Daphne through marble gardens. The body, once hidden beneath layers of symbolism, is now celebrated for its curves and warmth. Sculptors carve with tenderness, not restraint. Even in the music, something human stirs baroque, melodies swelling with emotion, teasing the edge between sacred and sensual. Yet beyond the candlelit salons and gilded halls, most people still live much as they always have. In the countryside, peasants marry young, work hard, and sleep on straw beds beneath beams blackened by smoke. The talk of enlightenment rarely reaches them. For them, the church still holds sway, and morality remains simple. Obey, confess, repent, repeat. Desire is not discussed, it's endured. But even there, quiet changes are taking root. Midwives now carry small pamphlets printed in cheap ink, filled with new medical advice on childbirth and conception. Some learn to read, others simply memorize. Slowly, the mysteries of the body begin to loosen their grip on fear. A woman no longer needs to risk accusation of witchcraft for knowing too much. A man no longer fears eternal damnation for admitting curiosity. Still, not everyone welcomes this freedom. You hear sermons railing against immodesty, pamphlets warning of moral decay. The same printing press that spreads knowledge also spreads panic. Every gain in understanding seems to awaken a new wave of anxiety. It's the endless rhythm of progressed 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In the drawing rooms of London and Florence, something else begins to change. Intimacy itself, no longer bound solely to duty or property, affection begins to find a foothold in marriage. Letters between husbands and wives become warmer, less formal. Poets, like John Donne, write of love, not as sin, but as union, body and soul entwined. One flesh, he writes, one heart, one soul. You can almost hear the centuries of restraint cracking at the edges. But even this awakening has its limits. Women's bodies, though newly studied and painted, are still controlled by law and expectation. Their virtue remains currency, their pleasure an afterthought. Doctors debate their anatomy as though it were a mystery invented for men to solve. You see a young woman listening to such talk, her smile polite, her eyes far away. She knows what they do. Not that knowledge does not always equal freedom. By the 18th century, Europe hums with invention. Telescopes turn upward, microscopes downward, and the idea of a rational universe takes hold. Yet behind closed doors, the same human longings persist. The powdered courtiers and philosophers are still ruled by their hearts, still haunted by loneliness. They write endless letters, host masked balls, compose sonnets about touch and absence. The more they seek to master reason, the more they prove they are creatures of feeling. You walk down a lamplit street in Vienna, where couples stroll in ornate dress, their shadows touching before their hands do. The city feels alive with contrast, science and superstition, faith and reason, love and logic, all weaving through one another. A man passes you, his face powdered white, his scent of rose water sharp in the cold air. He's laughing softly, perhaps on his way to meet someone in secret. The Enlightenment may have changed how people talk about desire, but not how they chase it. Back in England, a philosopher named John Locke writes of experience shaping the mind. You can't help but think how fitting it is that even the thinkers of this age admit that feeling precedes knowledge. Desire, curiosity, affectional, are part of the experiment of of being human. They always were, even when the world called them sin. By the end of the 18th century, the old medieval world is barely visible. Its cathedrals still stand, but its certainties have cracked. The body is no longer just a vessel for the soul, is the soul's expression. The whispers of shame have grown quieter, replaced by questions of psychology, anatomy, and art. You can sense modernity just over the horizon, waiting to take the stage, and yet, as you turn back to the people in this moment, the lovers, the thinkers, the skeptics, you realize they're still reaching for the same thing their ancestors did: understanding, whether through prayer, science, or touch. Every era's pursuit is the same: to feel connected, to make sense of the heart's unending restlessness. The Enlightenment didn't end passion, it simply gave it a new vocabulary, one that mixed poetry with proof, reason with longing, and as candles burn low in 1,000 European rooms, men and women across centuries share one quiet truth: the more they study the world, the more mysterious they find themselves. You walk into a softer century now. The cobblestones are still uneven, but the footsteps echo differently, gentler, more measured. The air smells faintly of powder and perfume instead of tallow and sweat. By the late 18th century, the medieval world has finally faded, leaving behind a strange calm. The world has discovered mirrors, both literal and philosophical, and people are beginning to see themselves not as sinners or saints, but as individuals. Behind lace curtains and candlelit parlors, intimacy is being rewritten again, not as duty or sin, but as something private, even tender. In the drawing rooms of London and Paris, couples speak in coded phrases, their glances doing most of the talking. The language of love grows polite, its edges rounded by manners and modesty. What was once open secret lust, longing human want is now dressed in silk and powdered restraint. People write letters instead of touching, sketch portraits instead of confessing. Privacy has become the new virtue and passion, the quiet rebellion of the well-bred. You drift through a London townhouse where a husband and wife dine by candlelight. The food is delicate, the talk lighter still, yet beneath it runs something unspokenly, understanding that they are partners in more than a state or appearance. For the first time, marriage is beginning to tilt toward affection. Slowly, imperceptibly, love is learning to live behind closed doors rather than under the church's gaze. The body is no longer an object of sin, but a part of self, something to be cared for rather than conquered. Science has tamed superstition. Medicine has chased the shadows from the human form. What was once hidden beneath fear is now studied under glass. But reason, for all its precision, cannot chart the pulse of the heart. Even in this enlightened age, you see people longing, fumbling, aching the same ancient rhythm that no progress can erase. Historians still argue whether the loss of mystery made love more real or merely quieter, but you can feel it. Tenderness no longer needs confession. It breathes freely now. Outside, the streets of Europe hum with a new kind of energy. Industry is awakening, cities are growing, and with them comes loneliness of a modern kind. The world moves faster, but hearts do not. You pass a young woman at her window, gazing at a letter that will never be answered. You pass a man walking home through the fog, thinking of someone he cannot name. Intimacy, it seems, has survived every empire, every sermon, every silence. It has only changed its mask, and so the medieval world dissolves at last, not in war or plague, but in the gentle erosion of time. The rituals, the sermons, the whispered superstitions, all fade like candle smoke. What remains is the simplest truth of all: people trying to find one another in the dark. Now the streets quiet, the music fades, and the centuries settle into stillness. It's time to slow down, to let the noise of history drift away like distant rain. The images soften stone walls, turning to mist, torches to stars, voices to murmurs. You feel yourself sinking, not through time but through calm. The world you've walked through, the straw beds, the cathedrals, the perfumes and plagues, begins to fold in on itself like an old book closing. You breathe deeper, the air cools, smooth against your thoughts. You realize how much of the past was simply people trying to love and be loved, fumbling toward connection with the tools they had. It's strangely comforting to know that even across centuries, the ache is the same. Maybe progress isn't in the invention of reason or the fall of superstition, but in the quiet understanding that every heart beats toward another. No matter how the world changes, the sound of a distant bell rings once, faint and round, fading into the hum of sleep. You picture the old churchyards again, not as places of sorrow but of rest. The graves no longer whisper, they simply breathe with the rhythm of the earth. The people who once lived, laughed, and longed are all at peace now, their stories merging into one great exhale. Asterisk, everyone comment down from where and at what time you are watching this video. As you let your own breathing slow, the candlelight of memory flickers out, leaving only warmth. You feel the centuries slip from your shoulders, leaving you lighter. Everything becomes quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for thought or meaning, just stillness. So, you close your eyes and let history fade into the distance. Somewhere, far off, the wind carries the sound of laughter, faint and human, crossing the bridge of time. You've walked through ages, tonight, through belief, through fear, through the tender heart of what it means to be alive. And now, you can rest. Sweet dreams.